Here are the summaries of the graphs of the trigonometric functions. For the graph of y equals psi of x, the 5 key points would be 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0 at 5 different points from 0 to 2 pi or in one cycle. So the domain of the psi function is the set of all real numbers, the range from -1 to +1 because the maximum is 1, the minimum is -1. The amplitude is 1, which is from the formula 1/2 times the absolute value of the difference of the max and the min. The max is m equals 1 and the min is the lowercase m equals -1. The period is 2 pi because the graph completes one cycle after 2 pi. For the zeros or the x-intercept, the graph of y equals psi of x crossing the x-axis at 0, at pi, at 2 pi. And if you keep going with the graph, gonna be called like the multiple of the pi or x equals k times pi, where k is any integer. Excuse me. For the graph of y equals cosine x, the 5 key points would be 1, 0, -1, 0, and +1 at the 5 key points within the angle from 0 to 2 pi or within one cycle of the graph. The domain is a set of all real numbers. The range is the same as the range of y equals psi x or the interval -1, +1 because the maximum is at 1, the minimum is -1. To compute the amplitude is the same way. And the period is 2 pi because the graph complete one cycle after 2 pi. The zeros or the x-intercept, the graph crossing the x-axis at pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. And if you keep going with the graph, the next one gonna be 5 pi over 2. And we call the odd multiple of the pi divided by 2. Or in the general form as pi over 2 plus k pi. If you rewrite it in one fraction, it's gonna be pi plus 2k pi divided by 2. Or in the form of 2k plus 1 multiplied by pi divided by 2. And the quantity 2k plus 1 is the general form to represent the odd number. For the graph of y equals tangent and the graph of the y equals cotangent x, the y equals tangent x, the tangent x function is from the quotient of the sine x and the cosine x. Wherever the cosine is 0, the function is undefined. So at the point pi over 2, the cosine is 0. Therefore, there is the vertical asymptote at x equals pi over 2. And then the graph on the left and the graph on the right, as you see on the diagram. The domain would be the set of all real numbers except at the asymptote. And the range would be the set of all real numbers because the graph keeps going all the way up and all the way down for each piece of the graph. The amplitude is not defined because we could not find the maximum and minimum values of the function y equals to tangent x. The period is pi because the graph repeats the same pattern every pi length of the graph, or every pi, the graph repeats the same pattern. The amplitude, the asymptote, asymptote is the point where the cosine of the x equals 0. So every pi over 2 plus k pi, the graph will have the asymptote. Why is k pi? Because every pi, the graph repeats the same pattern, or we can say pi is the period of the function y equals tangent of x. For the graph of y equals cotangent x, the cotangent x is the reciprocal of the tangent x, which is the form of the cosine x divided by sine x. Similar way of considering the y equals tangent x, the denominator cannot be 0, or wherever the sign x equals 0, the graph will have the vertical asymptote. And then to sketch the graph of the cotangent is the reciprocal graph of the y equals tangent x. Based on the graph, the domain is a set of all real numbers except at the x equals at the asymptote of the graph, which is at the multiple of the pi. At the vertical asymptote, no graph exists or the function is not defined. The range is a set of all real numbers because as you see the graph is all the way to positive infinity and it keep going to the negative infinity. The amplitude not defined as well because we could not find the maximum value and minimum value of the function. The period is pi because every pi, the graph repeat the same pattern. The 0 or wherever the graph crossing the x-axis, the graph will cross x-axis at x equals pi over 2 for the first period. And if you keep going, it's going to be another portion that added by pi to the first x-axis or the x-intercept. So then the first x-intercept is pi over 2 and then added by the multiple of the pi because the period is pi for the cotangent x. The asymptote where the graph provide the vertical asymptote, which means wherever the sign of x equals 0. The graph of y equals cosecant x and y equals secant x. The y equals cosecant x is the reciprocal of sine of the x, where the y equals secant x is the reciprocal of the cosine of the x. So with this, you can see if you start with the graph of the y equals sine x, and then sketch the reciprocal graph of the y equals sine x to obtain the y equals cosine x as you see in the red color of the curve. Based on the red color of the curve here, the domain is the set of all real numbers, except at the point that the sign x is 0 because the reciprocal of 0 is infinity or is undefined. So at x equals pi, x equals 2 pi, or the multiple of the pi, no graph exists for the y equals cosecant x. The range gonna be two portions. The first one from the value 1 all the way up to positive infinity, and the other one starting from negative 1 all the way down. So that's why we get the range as y is less than or equal to negative 1, and the other portion is y is greater than or equal to 1. For the amplitude is not defined because we could not find the maximum value and the minimum value of the graph of the y equals cosecant x. The period is 2 pi because it repeats the same pattern for every 2 pi, which is the same as the period of the sine function. The 0 or the x-intercept is not available because the graph will never cross the x-axis. The asymptote is the vertical asymptote or at the point that the sign of x is going to be 0. The way to get the information of the secant of the x is the same thing by sketching the graph of the cosine x to begin with. And then sketch the reciprocal graph to obtain the graph of y equals secant x. Reciprocal, excuse me. So the domain of y equals secant x graph is the set of all real numbers except x equals pi over 2 plus the multiple of the pi, because for the cosine of x, when the cosine is 0, the x or the angle gonna be the pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 5 pi over 2, or we can say this is the odd multiple of the pi, which is in the form of 2k plus 1 times pi divided by 2. And 2k plus 1 is the representation of the odd number. The range is the same as the range of the y equals cosecant x because no graph of the secant appears between -1 and +1. So anything starting from 1 all the way to positive infinity, and anything starting from negative 1 all the way down to negative infinity. The period is 2 pi, which is the same as the period of the y equals cosine x. The 0 is not available because the graph of the secant x will never cross the x-axis. The asymptote or the vertical asymptote occurs at x equals pi over 2 plus the multiple of the pi, or you can write in the single fraction as 2k plus 1 multiplied by pi divided by 2, where 2k plus 1 is the representation of the odd, the same way that we look at the domain. And if you make a list, it could be the x equals plus minus pi over 2, plus minus 3 pi over 2, plus minus 5 pi over 2, and so forth.